But I will go ahead and turn it over to the gentleman talking about powering the digital grid with network automation and AI-driven operations. I'm excited.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. It's not even on. You're just loud. Okay. I'm impressed. All right. Yeah, we're going to talk about network automation and orchestration. Before I introduce myself, I'm going to let the rest of the team introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself, and we'll jump into it. Go ahead, Karan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Karan Munalingal from Itential, technical leader, and I head up all the strategic accounts globally for our company.
Right. Craig Hammond, a network architect for SCE, working on the internal and grid networks.
Hey everyone, Zach Hoffman. I'm our senior manager of our pre-sales systems engineers and architects with Worldwide Technology. Been with WWT for 11 years, pretty much all of those supporting utilities, including Edison here.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm Matt Deibel. I'm the manager of grid automation services at Southern California Edison, and my team's responsible for automation and AI deliveries. So today we're going to talk to you about kind of the lens around automation orchestration from a few of us. I'm going to talk to you about Edison's journey and kind of some of the stuff we did when we evaluated automation orchestration. Then you're going to hear a little bit from Karan about Itential and what that is, differentiate automation and orchestration and the value of knowing the difference between those two, and then the value of investing in a solution that helps there. And then we're going to hear from Zach a little bit about what WWT can help with in terms of helping you understand your environment, how to produce an automation platform that can scale and support all the different technologies you have. Sorry, quick water. And lastly, Craig's going to talk about SCE specific use case and some of our architecture, and that'll help you see how we're actually using this platform. And then from there, we're going to turn it over to questions. We got a bunch of great people up here with a lot of experience, so hopefully you'll get a diverse pool of answers to the questions you might have around this. So we'll talk about SCE's automation journey. Quick, just to introduce you to what we're supporting here at SCE and why this is so important to us. We just have a large, I should say a vast spread of portfolios that we deploy and operate. And so for us, in each of these portfolio stacks, what I want to point out is there's different systems involved. And so as we're talking about automation and orchestration, each of these might have their own systems that have some capabilities from an automation standpoint. But what we were looking at SCE is how do you combine or create a platform that can support all of them across the board, right? You can see the 100,000 asset count, and that's expected to grow exponentially as we look at some big programs that are happening that a lot of other utilities are exploring as well around FAN. Our first use case looking to project to add 50,000 new endpoints. And then beyond that, looking at initiatives like AMI 2.0, where our platform could now support over 5 million endpoints. So this is important just for you to understand kind of some of the scale and breadth of technology that we were looking at as we evaluated automation, orchestration, and network and infrastructure space. Some of the challenges at SCE, as you can see, I kind of put 4 big ones for us, but I'm going to talk about them. The first one, I probably should have worded this a little better, vendor automation limitations. What I'm trying to get across here is that some of the frustration that we had internally in SCE was we had these different vendors in these different technology portfolios that we were working with. And a lot of them brought a lot of great automation to the table already out of the box, right? I think where we started to feel frustration was some of the times these vendors would come and say, hey, we can manage other third-party tools as well, or we can do these extra integrations. And so frustration would form around, are we getting the value out of these tools, or why do we need to make more investment in something else when this is kind of what we're hearing? And I think as I think about this one specifically, and this is a big challenge, us as utilities, we need to be better around really understanding and working with our vendors on what is the real value that I want to get out of the solution coming with your tool as I purchase some new technology stack, right? And what are the bigger objectives I'm trying to accomplish? And looking at that holistically and trying to build a platform around that. And similarly with the vendors, one of the things I would advise is I feel like if the vendors would spend 50% of the time that they try to develop tools that do more than they should into just making their tools more programmatic, more advanced in terms of having streaming data capabilities, change data capture capabilities, and really focusing on their tech stack, then we could build integrations with that into this bigger orchestration platform. There'd be a lot more value there. Moving on from that, data availability, data quality. When you talk about automation, AI, which you have to talk about in every single presentation, unfortunately, data is always the foundation, right? So this is huge for us. We learned about this in our journey, how important data quality was when it came to automation. And we spent time on culture and made investments there to make sure we had the data available. That goes into the next one, this culture, making people want to partake in automation, making people think data is important and worry less just about getting their job done, but worry about how the data they're inputting into systems impacts some of these downstream things like doing automation, doing AI in the future was really important for us. And if you've been to some of our other talks, we talked about our grid transformation office that helped us in that area. And then the affordability culture, going back to, again, we needed to make an investment to enable some of these capabilities. And affordability is a big challenge right now at the utility space, right? So how are we able to justify with leaders to make some level of investment in a platform that will scale and provide automation orchestration capabilities? So where to get started? This is a little bit of our journey specifically. We wanted to focus on the culture first, shared about our grid transformation office that really helped us do that. And then additionally, we then took it from there to focus in on making sure we had clear design standards. So if you have a lot of edge cases that you're supporting or building a lot of designs around edge cases, that's just going to make more automation cases, which is a little bit hard to scale. So really focusing in at the engineering, the design, the architecture level and bringing all that in and trying to standardize as much as possible is a great effort to undertake as you get into this journey. Cross-functional alignment is really important. Going back to my first slide, tons of different organizations. They have their own build and operating models, right? Different tools they're using. When you talk about network and or network infrastructure, automation, orchestration in our space, you impact so many different groups, engineering, the build teams on the field, right? The operations team that you hand this over to, and also teams like compliance or even cyber in some aspects, right? So making sure you have everyone aligned, going back to my point around these different leaders and different verticals are hearing, hey, I have tools that do certain things, but if you can get in front of that and help all the leaders understand a bigger platform and a direction you want your organization to go, that is really beneficial. There's a great word picture I had in another presentation of all these arrows that were kind of pointed disjunctly. And that's kind of what will happen if you don't get this cross-functional alignment. You really want to make sure everyone's aware of the direction you want to go from an automation standpoint. So that way you can put the whole organization in the same direction towards here's a solution that's going to work for all of us and get that cross-functional alignment and buy-in. Investing in a scalable platform. So kind of downstream from getting everyone bought into that, you really build your case for making that investment, right? If you can showcase you have an architecture that's agnostic to the vendors, that can support multiple portfolios, you get alignment across the groups, that's really going to help bolster your case as you go looking for some level of investment to support this. Additionally with that, make sure you have programs or tools in place so you can measure the outcomes that you expect to get from these automation efforts. And then the last one, again, can't go through a presentation without AI. Same thing. If you present to your leaders, you better say AI or else you're not going to get any money. I'm just going to tell you that. So thinking about the future, telling them this is going to support AI is always going to be beneficial, right? As much as that's a joke, there is a lot of truth to that because having this foundational element in place, similar to the data, right? Having network and infrastructure automation orchestration builds that machine-to-machine inputs into your devices. And ultimately, that is a method that you can use to enhance your data governance. You're now no longer getting users inputting, whatever they feel like the right interface name or otherwise should be. And that builds consistency. And now you've built this platform of data that's consistent that you can rely on. How to secure the buy-in. So these fundamental pillars I've been talking about, and this is really super important as you try to accomplish something like this in your organization. Having that alignment was huge. The data-driven metrics, I mentioned that. Make sure you're thinking in a way that resonates with leaders. Talk about cost savings, talk about reducing SLAs, talk about reliability, availability metrics, right? Make sure you're trying to quantify exactly what you're trying to accomplish with this automation platform into a way that a leader can say, this makes sense. And the story's out there. Automation does make sense. We all know it. What we need to be able to do a better job of as technical people is having that big business language and being able to explain to leadership how it makes sense to them, right? So make sure you think about that, how you're going to approach that. Do some demonstrations. Go back to culture talks. One of my advice is showcase automations you're building, right? Showcase what am I building today, whether it's just little scripts or otherwise. A lot of times people will just kind of keep that to themselves or to their little organization, and it'll be a feel good, like, hey, I'm no longer day after day just typing away. I got this script that helps me. Find a platform where you can start to showcase that a little bit, work with your leaders to showcase it outward. And that starts to help people see that there's capabilities there, people that they can invest in and trust in. And it also builds that kind of momentum with leadership for them to be like, hey, there's a path forward here, right? I see value in what they're doing, and I can see how there's continual value if we can somehow scale and continue to reproduce this. Operational consistency. You're definitely looking at your ops leaders. One of my ops leaders in the room, and he always looks at me around this one, but it's super important for the operations team to have consistent devices being turned over to them, right? I talked about the scale we're looking to introduce at SCE. Today we maybe get 100 devices turned over from our engineering department to our operations to manage. As that turns into 1,000 a month, they need to make sure that there's some level of consistency, or they're just going to go crazy flat out. And there's not going to be enough people to support that. There's going to be rogue configurations out there. So having operational consistency is a really good selling point. I'm not going to harp on AI readiness anymore. You guys understand that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our platform. And a huge part of us selecting our platform was some of our partnership with Worldwide Technology. So in our journey, we knew we needed to find something that was going to support all these portfolios. And we were looking for something that wasn't just tactical automation tasks, something that would orchestrate. We wanted integration into our ITSM system, which is Remedy, now Helix. Similarly, some of our CMDB systems like SAP. So as you, for example, onboard a device, you could have a workflow that's integrating to all these things and being automated. And that's where Itential came in for us. But as we were looking for this, we were working with our main partner, WWT, and trying to figure out what makes sense for us. And one of the values, and Zach's going to talk about this in his a little bit, is in their advanced technology lab, they were able to replicate a lot of the systems we had across our domains in their lab and able to show us, here's some platforms that you could use that could provide solutions across all these domains, right? So that really helped us in a very short period of time. I think we did some POCs over 2 weeks to really build confidence in, hey, you're showing me you can actually do something substantial in multiple different domain technologies with a single platform, right? And that helped us build confidence in selecting Itential ultimately. And the big reason is, as I was sharing, we wanted that orchestration capability. Much different than just tactical automation tasks. We're trying to get to full end-to-end workflow orchestration. And internally right now, we're looking at 3 main use cases that we're targeting: device onboarding, device offboarding, and software upgrades or patching, and trying to accomplish those workflows end-to-end across our most critical assets today. With that, I'm going to hand it over. Karan's going to teach you a little bit more about the Itential platform, some of our use cases and where we see value, and potentially show you where you might see some value.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to quickly go into it since we have introduced ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about automation and orchestration. For the longest time in the industry, that has been network automation as a dream that everyone was chasing, both engineering, operations, et cetera, right? So from our perspective, we have taken a strong stand against what is automation, what is orchestration? And there needs to be a separation with respect to concepts because both of them provide a lot of value to every organization here. As Matt mentioned, right, a lot of organizations today, whether it's utility enterprises, providers, they have started with some level of automation within certain domains within their environment. It's because it's humanly impossible to maintain the level of growth that is coming in their network. So engineers, operators, they're actually starting to turn towards things like Python scripting, Ansible, Terraform, right? Those actually do very specific tasks against your infrastructure assets. So when we initially talked to Matt about this, he said, we have already started down that journey. We have a DevOps team that is leveraging all these capabilities provided by open source community and all to do task-based automation. What we're currently looking at is trying to stitch all those siloed automation together to drive business value. And that's where you talk a little bit about orchestration, right? When you think about someone coming to you and saying, hey, can I get infrastructure in your actual network? That actually includes infra in the cloud or private cloud. It includes having to actually instantiate firewall rules. It includes creating ports for connectivity to flow through. That is someone coordinating these activities across different technologies, different teams in order to provide a product to your end user. And that's where we differentiate a combination. That's where we differentiate what automation means, which is domain and task focus, and orchestration, which is coordinating these automation together to drive value, right? And I'll talk a little bit about, and so will Craig, on how they have done that within SCE. So what is the problem that Itential solves, right? You have your current change process that usually involves one or multiple teams in order to deliver some value. Usually the value comes in 5 days, 10 days, 15 days later. So what is Itential focused on is taking advantage of your existing assets and your existing technology investments that might have some level of automation and tie that cohesively together in order to drive value and time to market with respect to how fast you can deliver products that folks are requesting from an infrastructure standpoint. And as everybody here knows, it's not just humans asking for infrastructure and network services, it's machine now, right? They mentioned AMI 2.0. They mentioned FAN. Like these are new network devices and assets coming up in the utility space that now require network connectivity that is secure and persistent. So now you're going to have machine requiring these services way faster than 5 days in order to operate. So that's where Itential plays a huge role in helping stitch that together. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the stack, right? Bottoms up. If you think about orchestration, in order for someone to orchestrate, integrating into your existing landscape becomes the most critical thing. So how do we integrate across both your programmable infrastructure, which is controllers, other orchestrators are available provided by vendors, as well as non-programmable, something that does not have an API, something that is CLI, NetConf operated. So from our standpoint, once you have that baseline of being able to communicate to all your assets and third-party systems, now you can start stitching all these layers together in order to provide a service. So when we kind of layer up on that, one of the biggest things that I've heard this week is focus on standardizing and having compliance in place for the grid infrastructure, is because that's what the compliance team cares for. That's what operations cares for, is I want to make sure that my grid is secure, that my grid is standardized, so I can have AI initiatives on top. I can have additional services on top. So from a network configuration standpoint, that compliance and config management piece becomes a big piece. Service orchestration, as we discussed, that's where building these workflows across your siloed technologies, across different domain, becomes a big thing. And one of the things that we have learned working with a lot of customers like Southern Cal is when you start orchestrating, when you start communicating with various different systems, even though they talk the same language like REST API, data transformation and manipulation becomes a big deal. Naturally, if you go ask a developer today, they have to write a Python script in order to manipulate data. So when I say, well, how do you stitch two of these Python scripts, they will say with a third Python script, right? So from our perspective, it is critical that we take advantage of right tool for the right job and help stitch that together in a unified fashion in order to provide that as a self-service capability. And finally, we're talking about stateful orchestration. When we get into use cases like device onboarding, creating infrastructure for application developers, that requires a sense of understanding on what the automation or orchestration platform has done on behalf of a human in your network. So for the longest time, we have had fire and forget orchestration capability where someone asks us to do something, we'll do that across multiple different systems. But now we can remember what we did. So when it's time to undo or lifecycle that, we can very easily understand the attributes of what we change in the network. So whether we can modify that, we can update that for our clients north down. And finally, if you look all the way to the top, every enterprise today wants to have a cloud-like experience for your end users. What does that mean? I just want to show up to a portal, click a few buttons, and get that service enabled. And this happens basically from a self-service capability where you don't have to call. We don't have to talk to humans in order to get something fast. So when you talk about chatbots, they talked about LLMs, they talked about pipelines, you're now catering to so many different personas from a network infrastructure standpoint, including machines, where you have to make it consumable for each and every one of these entities in the same way. Like it can't be because you're a human, you have to give me a call, and you're a pipeline, I'm going to give you an API. I think it is, we have to democratize the way that they consume your infrastructure services more securely in the same fashion. So that's basically the Itential stack on how we actually layer up and support these sort of various use cases across operation engineering and consumption. So let's talk a little bit about the paradigm, right? What is the operational paradigm that a lot of our customers go through? When you start integrating into various different domains, you have your domain experts. So when someone is building modular automation, it becomes critical that it becomes a reusable asset for the entire enterprise. Example, when someone creates a workflow that creates a ticket or CRQ within Remedy, now that asset should be consumable by any other team within that organization as part of their own orchestration flow. So the example that you see here on the right is you're going to have teams that focus on Palo Alto, the security platform. You're going to have teams that focus on Infoblox from a DDI perspective, Azure, automation scripts, etc. So you're going to have different folks in different domains using different technologies, but their way of automating might be way different. So how do we take advantage of what they're bringing to the table and making that available as a Lego block that you can stitch together in order to get a deliverable out? So from our standpoint, this has worked very nicely for a lot of our customers in getting that scale where different team members with different expertise can participate in your automation and orchestration journey. All right, so let's talk a little bit, Matt and Craig are going to talk a little bit about this, but how do we in general support the utility vertical, right? As he heard, for any investment across any enterprise, you have to justify what is the business driver. And what we have seen is, whether it's O&M from an operational efficiency standpoint, that's what you get there, reducing that cost. When you talk a little bit about resiliency and minimizing downtime, because it starts impacting your end customers, right? And you talk a little bit about AI-driven operations, right? I know Matt hit on this, but everyone here, I attended a previous session where everyone raised their hand on whether they want to do AI or not. But in order for us to get there, I think it's very critical that you start thinking about who is making changes in your network and how consistent those changes are. Because as you automate that, it becomes a pattern with which machines are now updating all these systems when they make a change in your network, which makes it easy for AI to train on structured data. So with respect to something that Craig is going to talk about today is as difficult or as simple as onboarding a devices in your network, how consistently can you do this across these systems? So then it becomes easier for operations, AI ops tooling in order to understand what is happening in my network, as well as what actions can I progressively take against your infrastructure more securely. And compliance is starting to become a big thing across every vertical that we work through. So with respect to NERC SIP, it is starting to become more and more critical on how we can partner together with our customers in order to drive standard day zero, day one across all of your platform, not just a network, not just a router switches, but also your existing infrastructure systems and controllers that provide some level of policy over the top. Because once you have that, rest assured, whether you're engineering, whether your compliance team, whether your operations, you're betting on the fact that my network is, whether it's brownfield or greenfield, my network is now at a compliance level where that can consistently keep creating more services on top, as well as support initiatives like data as a service, right? It all relies on how consistent your data is. And if you don't have guardrails, governance, and compliance around it, it becomes a hard thing to follow. So that was it. And I'm going to hand it off to Zach to talk a little bit about their network transformation programs. Go ahead. Oh, thanks.
So I wanted to start off with a quote and kind of why care about automation. My hope is that all of you are here in this room because you care about it to some extent. But as IT and OT networks continue to become complex and scale, and everything requires network connectivity, we heard it throughout this week. Like every meter is a smart meter now. FAN networks are growing. Enterprise networks are growing. The ability to operate these things becomes increasingly complex, borderline impossible. Most organizations' budgets aren't increasing, but they're not hiring a bunch of net new FTEs. So we have to take into account things like automation and orchestration to become more efficient. So when Worldwide Technology first engages with a client, I always like pulling up this slide, which is really, it's our automation maturity curve. And you look at the left at a 0 or a 1. These are really where there's no automation, or maybe there's little bits of automation, but it's done like someone is building a script for a very specific task, or maybe one team has adopted the tool, but there's really no cross-organizational alignment. There's no standardization. There's no orchestration, right? Go all the way to the right to a 5. That's the vision, and that's where we're trying to get as an organization. So things like AI ops, self-healing networks, where you're able to literally spin up a redundant data center in the matter of about 30 seconds. You're able to have the automation take a look at what's going on in the network, realize there's a snowflake in the environment, and proactively push an update to correct that, obviously with the reporting required to make sure that it's doing that correctly. But really our objective is to show this to clients and figure out where they're at. So I wanted to do a quick poll here without reading through, all of these. If you guys would all hold up like a 1 or a 2 or a 3, 4 or 5, etc. How would you rate yourself today from an automation perspective?
Once you go 3 to 1, and we can already rate. Let's say 0, let's say 1.
Yeah.
That
Yeah, so I see it. I saw a couple zeros, some 1s and some 2s. I would say from our experience, that's very common, right? You guys aren't alone in that. So what we really try to do is, where do we start, right? In our experience, where you start are a couple of things. Number one, you got to figure out your data strategy and ensure you have clean data, you have a source of truth that can be trusted. Number two, it's really around the cultural alignment aspect. You have to have executive buy-in. You have to have technical champions that are able to be culture change agents in your organization. Because at the end of the day, if you all build this automation and orchestration and have investments in these areas, but no one adopts it, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So that cultural component is really critical for organizations. So with Edison in particular, Matt alluded to it. We are able to leverage our Advanced Technology Center, which is based out of St. Louis, where our company's headquarters is. It's a $900 million infrastructure investment, but really the net of it is we were able to mimic SoCal Edison's environment as close as we could, integrate with a variety of tools, NetMRI, Spectrum, etc. And in partnership with Itential, we're able to prove out that Itential could integrate with all these tools and truly act as that orchestration layer that met SoCal Edison's requirements in a seamless and easy fashion. But the net of this is we're really after, with the ATC, de-risk the solution, make a time to decision faster, and ultimately prove that the solution is going to work and meet your requirements. And so we're continuing to leverage the ATC on an ongoing basis, which has been fantastic. And Craig's going to talk a little bit about the specific projects we have in flight right now. So Craig, I will hand it over to you.
All right, so we're talking about a use case that we did here for automation or orchestration on the network, specifically to the greenfield deployment of our LAN switches, and then also brownfield deployment of LAN switches for lifecycle refresh. So when we got started on this, we really had to look at the flow, like what's going on, what's the engineer doing in order to make this a reality, right? And there's all these different pieces that go with it. So they've got to go out there and they've got to get a config template, they've got to get IP addresses and go into a tool and update that, right? They've got to open a change request, and they've got to create DNS and so forth, and then configure the template, update databases. All these are manual tasks, and all these manual tasks happen for every device. And if you think about our LAN switches for us specifically, and we got a couple thousand of them, so it's high volume. A lot of tasks, a lot of manual work there, things that could be automated. So this happened to be something that had a lot of value for our company to be able to go in and start automating this, and this is why we took this. So we looked at this, we said, well, what do we want to do and how are we going to do it? And so we're going to now take all those tasks that were manual and be able to use Itential gear to start orchestrating them. So it's actually done, it's done automatically for each part. Now there's a lot of benefit to this. Obviously, if you have somebody going in and updating data on their own, they put it in the way that they think. Maybe sometimes there's a space, sometimes there's a hyphen, sometimes it's an underscore. You need to see a lot of inconsistencies with the data. By doing it like this, it's the same every single time. But the big part is by removing each of these different manual steps and having that done in an orchestrated manner, is you take a step back and look at the role of the engineer, and it's completely changed. That engineer no longer has to spend all this time doing all this busy work. And then now what they can do is they can start looking at the technology and say, well, what are maybe some new features I should be using? How should I be updating this process flow? What can I do for pre and post tests? How can I enhance those? How can I make it better? And so now you're actually taking the engineer and making them much more efficient and being able to use their intelligence to improve the outcomes for the business. It also improves a lot of pieces from an operational perspective. If you look at this now, there's a lot of consistency, right? They always know what the data is going to be. They can also start looking at maybe even doing some of the deployments. So for example, maybe your engineer actually does a site evaluation and the site design, and they prep everything, but now maybe you've got an operational team actually doing the turn-up, like a 24/17. Construction team goes out, installs the equipment, it comes up, automatically downloads its code, its configuration, and it's all automated. It's always consistent. It becomes a trusted model. So this is where we're going to. So let's talk a little bit about that journey. It's not something you just go out, you say, okay, hey, we're ready to do this. A lot of people ask, well, how do you get started? And it's not even really like, hey, let's get some automation tools and let's start automating. You have to take a step back and you have to create repeatability. You can't automate very well a whole bunch of different standards, a whole bunch of different configurations. It becomes very complex. You'd have so many different steps, and it changes, right, for each and every design. So we first started doing is we brought all the teams together. It wasn't just the architecture team. It was the engineering team. It's the operations team. It's basically everybody involved in the whole process. And so what we did is we standardized our network design. So the network design was very consistent, always repeatable. We went and we looked at the models of hardware that we had, and we consolidated that down. You'd be surprised how many different types of platforms. You get one type of switch, and then this one's got PoE, this one doesn't. This one's got this configuration, this one doesn't. You look, and then the interfaces, like the naming of the changes and things like that, becomes a real challenge. So we consolidate all that down, and then we then start going in configuration standards, right? It could be VLAN names, port channel numbers. But effectively at the end of this, what we have is uplink ports are always the same. Downlink ports are always the same. Ports that connect systems together, they're always the same. And it's very consistent, which makes it very easy to do. And we didn't just do this for like one area. We did this across our enterprise. We did this across our grid so that it's very consistent. If you look at, for us anyway, over time, you have all these different standards, Somebody says, hey, layer 2 is the way to go. And then layer 3 down to the access. And that was where it's like we had so many different pieces out there. And the automation, all like the operations teams, the NOCs, like, well, which one am I working on? And they're really having to work hard to figure it out. By standardizing it, the code, the configuration, everything is the same. Every time when you look at it, you know what you're looking at. You don't have to question it. So this is where we started before we had done any automation. We really stampeded pretty much everything that we could. The next step in the journey for us was, how do we start like the initial automation? How do we go from getting a box that comes out, an engineer's got to get it, put it in the lab, unbox it, configure it, put the code on it, box it back up, ship it back out to construction. They take it out to the field, and then we start working on it. So what we did is we put a control. We started out with Catalyst Center. It used to be called DAG. You're familiar with it. The specific is Cisco. But by doing that, we were actually able to have a tool that could take config templates, our config templates, and have a little bit of a wizard for where we needed variables, for example, host names and things like that. And we were able to start using that to enhance our deployment. So this was kind of 1.0. By putting this out there, this is the first time we're actually able to send devices out into the field. And that device, it phones home, it pulls down its code, pulls down its config, and it's pretty much a zero-touch provision. Now, there's still a lot of other pieces that are going into this, right? You still got to go in at this point, get your IP addresses from your IP management tool. You still got to do DNS updates. You still got to go through and get all the variables that you need and update the databases. However, it's a big step. It's not the end, but again, it's a journey. And so this is the first part of our journey. After we've done the standards, we're now able to just deploy a device. Instead of all of that, like I said, going out to be unpackaged, the construction guy just drives it straight out to the field and plugs it in. So this was a big step. And this was honestly another part that really helped the operational team, because now we're starting to get systems into this one database. We're starting to have all the same code, the same configuration. So this is where we start to see a lot of value. We build on this now by being able to take not just like the automation piece, but some intelligence. So all of this being put in a DNAC, there's telemetry, there's intelligence within the system. There's now dashboards. There's the ability to start getting all these logs and correlate data. And there's some intelligence to where, hey, here's your top 10 things you might want to consider. Maybe here's some guided remediation for problems that you have. And so this is where we started to be able to get some kind of the next level, instead of just having like everybody is just very knowledgeable on how to do it. Maybe some of the lower tiers are now a lot stronger. They can go out there and use these tools to be able to help you more proactive, for one, but two, get like some assistance from some intelligence and assist. So this is where we went next. And the point, this is where we're going. We're still doing some work on this, but this is now where we're talking about that slide we looked at originally, the second one, where it's all orchestrated. And so this is where we've got all the service integrations. So now with Itential can go out there and it starts putting everything in a single source of truth. It's actually, it is handling all the IP address work and everything. And this is where we've now got a full end-to-end, like pretty much a closed loop to be able to do the turnips. So yeah, this is the end state. So we're not all the way there, but we're getting a lot closer. All right. So with that, I think we're at the questions. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have the panel hanging out for another 20 minutes, looks like we have. So open it up for some questions. And if not, I've prepared a few spicy ones to get these guys. Yeah. Go ahead. What do you guys got? Yep.
Is this program an IT environment or OT environment, like substation?
It's not the substation LAN, if that's what you're asking, but it's like the LANs that get out to those environments, but not the networks that have the relays on per se.
So my question is,
for us,
in that
diagram there showed the human, the clean would have been stuck. We probably have more than we should, but
We all.
but some of those humans in the steps are really there because they're coordinating with system operations. We always have the blocks with, well, today, normally you'll be this, but today you need to have somebody that's qualified to do switching at site in case something fails. So now you're waiting for some in-drive out there, stand around while you run your. So it's great to have an orchestration thing where you push one left and everything magically happens, but how do you coordinate, the requirements to keep the grid running with those steps in your orchestration? That's where I struggle with how to do this.
Are you talking specifically on the one that I was seeing at the end there? Rivka, that use case?
Just operations. For example, if I have 1,000 routers and I need to load a new firmware image and make configurations, I can't just push a button and let it all do. I have to schedule certain routers on certain days with, see the tickets to my operation center and that kind of thing. So how do you build that into the system?
Well, I mean, it's still there. It just depends on, once you've got your tools set up in your single source of truth and you have all your units, right, you decide what you need to push. Obviously, there's going to be different pieces. There are going to be some that are impacting changes and some that aren't. If it's impacted change, then it needs to be coordinated. And the way we handle something like that is, we'll pilot it out, we'll test it in our lab, we'll test it in our QA, and then we might do a site or two. And then what we do then is push it out further. As you start working through it, what happens is you start to get trust built up, not just with you, but with like the operations centers where they know, hey, this is minimal impact, no impact. But you really have to look at, well, what's the change? What I was explaining there was initial turn-up, right? As you start going through and maybe you're going to be adding some capability or you're going to be maybe inserting something or replacing something. It could take an outage. And I guess the other part is it just depends how many systems that needs to get done to, but it's a coordination.
Yeah.
And did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing. So normally, as you saw, right, full orchestration, sure, it's a dream in certain use case, but even patch upgrade, right? When you're talking about, I want to upgrade 1,000 switches in certain sites where there's a substation, you're going to have a pair. So from a change control standpoint, when we get, yeah, correct, exactly.
And so dealing with that,
yes.
So today you have one firewall.
Yeah.
The suggestion is made, well, you need to have two firewalls so you plan lower back.
Sure. Correct. Exactly.
Firewall,
yep. You got it. So we have some of our customers with respect to us, and the integration part is very important. So from a change control standpoint, what we do is someone realizes, so there is a CVE, right, from a vendor to say, hey, you must upgrade to this because it's vulnerable. And you're like, well, I need to plan that thing out. Humanly, someone looks at the list and say, when are we going to slot it? But because we can integrate into your existing change management system, we understand out of 1,000 switches, 500 are out of compliance. We can now go back and say, what does it look like from a business process standpoint? And how do we schedule that based on whether the substation is actually currently active? When is the load time for us to actually do that? So all of that could be orchestrated in a sense where we might be sending notifications to your ops engineering teams to say, do you confirm this particular schedule before I move forward? So from our platform standpoint, we can actually trigger another automation based on a particular time that was registered in Remedy. So this is something that we would actively do instead of someone saying, all right, it's time now. I'm going to go run that script, or I'm going to send this technician out on site in order to do that. And we're not saying that you would, for all use cases, the technicians go away. Even in like CPU rollout, someone has to show up and plug that in. And instead of them calling engineering department to say, can you please push the config now? Can you please run the test? All of that happens in tandem. And they basically sit there instead of 4 hours, they sit there for less than half an hour to make sure they get the bandwidth. And the certificate is actually sent out to a customer to say, hey, we've installed the CPE. It has the right bandwidth. It's operational. Technician walks away. So from our standpoint, there's always going to be humans involved in a set of use cases. But as we're talking with customers, where do you get started? you probably don't get started in the most complicated use case. You probably get started where you can actually make non-service impacting changes, because those are mundane changes that, automation should actually take care of.
And I think to your point,
Let's see, every so-called non-service connecting change fail at least once. It turns into whiskers. Then you don't expect to see that.
Sure.
It can. That's what I was saying with the test deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Coordination. And in an orchestrated tool, you can have a stop point or a checkpoint. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's called like, you need some checkpoint.
Yep.
It's not going to be how you build that into the system.
Yeah, we would. So,
Dashboard.
yeah, it's so because from an orchestration platform standpoint, because we integrate into so many technologies, operators usually go to their existing portals. If you have a NetOps portal, if you have Remedy or ServiceNow, we would actually stop over there because we can integrate. So we can say we're at a stopping point. So unless you move that ticket or a stage of that ticket to the next level,
Then I know, okay, yeah, call you.
that is correct. And based on what they do within that ticket, so they say, yep, I'm good with the information, good on schedule, go ahead and implement. That calls us back and we move forward. Yep.
Yeah, just to finalize that thought, I would say agnostically, as you evaluate platforms, think about that. Like, look at your process flows and the systems that your people integrate with to do that kind of thing. Like, if I go through an upgrade and it fails, what am I going to do? I'm going to open a ticket and try to figure it out, and make sure that the platform you're selecting will allow you to integrate into those process flows as well. That's really valuable.
Thing I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
So you're pretty much changing the role of the traditional network engineers as use case, right? So how has the adoption been for your traditional, maybe perhaps, somebody that has been in the position for a long time, and how are you preparing them to take in this new activity?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, there's definitely people who are more open to the changes than others. For us specifically, it's really bringing them in early and showing them the value of what we're doing, right? And letting them be a part of the process, and then getting them comfortable with it, right? Like I was saying, starting in a lab, starting in a QA environment, letting them see it, letting them say, hey, this is great, or no, I have trouble with that, and then educating them on the system so that it's easy for them. But it's not just engineering, right? It's the operations teams, it's bringing them in, letting them see how their work might change, how, for example, maybe they're running tests, but now you can just simply do those tests within this automated orchestrated process. So I would say it's bringing them in early and letting them see the value of what it is. And then what's really important is people get scared about automation and AI. They think it's going to take their job away. And, so what you've got to do is you've got to show them what it is that they can do and what they're going to do. And when they see the value in that, they're like, oh, wow, you know what? I could start doing this. Wow, I can improve that. Wow, I can use my intelligence instead of, I'm not putting a lugman on the wheel every single day. That's where I think a lot of value comes in. That's what
I would just add on, in addition to, bringing them in early, if you're able to figure out, I'll even ask the question sometimes, if there is one part of your job that you could eliminate or automate that you don't want to do, what is that, right? And many times you'll get some mundane, repeatable use case that takes up a lot of time. And so if you're able to paint the picture of, well, what if we could build some automation to take that off your plate so you could focus on these other areas that are more strategic, that you want to be spending your time in? And to Craig's point, that way they're engaged in the process early. They feel like you're helping them and they're bought into the process.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can elevate?
Yeah, go ahead. No, Ben, you're good.
Is there like an element to shift left in this like network automation journey? Because like we mentioned, obviously when we hit the go button on that automation, I don't think the expectation is that there's nobody that's going to be there to catch whenever it fails out, right? Like, what is that shift left strategy for this?
Yeah. So from a shift left perspective, right, it's a loaded term, but with respect to us, like whether it's a machine, whether it's a human that is interacting with the exposed automation, I think what we have seen work really well is instead of giving them a plethora of you can do whatever you want. So usually today you say, well, fill out a ticket. I can subjectively write whatever I want in a Remedy or ServiceNow ticket, and someone has to read it and translate that into what is that change. when we start when I say productizing your network infrastructure, when you were like, hey, I'm going to allow you to make a VLAN change, I'm going to allow you to bring up a brand new device, I'm going to allow you to create a security rule, I only need these 2 pieces of information and I'm going to take care of the rest. What you're basically doing is making life easier for your consumers, where they don't have to figure out, what am I looking at? Am I just giving you point A and Z and you figure out the rest? Or I'm giving you every single policy parameter, because they might not have visibility to your entire infrastructure. So from a shift left perspective, if you make it simpler for them to request changes, but even in that form or an API, if you're validating information up front to say, instead of giving you a list of Ethernet ports that you can go modify, these are the 4 in this particular site. Now you basically are limiting them to what change they can make in the network, right? So immediately, not only you're improvising a standard change that they can make, you're also improvising security, because they can randomly open up any port like 0.0.0.0 across your infrastructure, right? So, and when it comes to orchestration, there is security being embedded at the integration level on what an automation platform can do in your network. What is someone building within the orchestration platform, and how is that being exposed? So you're basically, instead of saying shift left, you're basically improvising security at every different layer. So it's, if something fails at the top and you're not catching what they're inputting, it's going to happen at the second layer. So that's something that what we have seen worked with a lot of our customers, and this is something that they're improvising in reality. Hopefully that I think we had a question in that corner.
You're talking about zero touch provisioning, and it sounds like you're doing about 80% of it. Zero touch, or some percentage of this left could be done. Who does that remaining 10 to 20%? And do they do it while the technician is still on site? Or how are you?
Yeah, I mean, today it's still the engineer. I've been working with our management team, and we've actually got what's called a release and deploy team now that does some of that. And that's a team that's really designed to do a lot of this type of work, but does it for multiple areas. So we're trying to hope maybe to have it go over into that area, but today it's an engineer that still does some of those tasks. But again, I mean, our goal is really trying to figure out how to bring those into an automated and orchestrated state. We had some trouble with some of the initial turn up just because of like the vendors. We happen to use a technology they didn't have support for. So in that, it became a manual process. And you have to be available to pivot. It's not an all or nothing thing all the time. Really what you're trying to do is, I've got this bulk of things that I can automate and orchestrate, and some are easier than others. And you're just really trying to chisel away at that. The more you do, the better off you are. And then where you can't, you're trying to look at, well, what else can I do? Like, so in some cases I might be looking at, do I need a design change? What does that look like? Maybe there's more complexity in the configuration, but if that's configuration's automated and it works well, then no big deal, right? Sure, it's some hard work up front, but now it's repeatable. So you have to really look at, well, how do you navigate those things? And that's really been the challenge that we've run into.
That 20%, you have technicians standing there while they hear that lane.
Yeah, well, the construction crew will still be on site for eyes and hands. What we've been trying to do is not have the engineers go on site. That's been the goal, is to kind of reduce that. But yeah, there'll still be construction people on site. Hey, I need you to reboot something. I need to plug something different. But most of the times the work is really more administrative. It's like going into a tool, maybe updating something, running a test, or hey, this test failed, so hey, let's take a look at what's going on. It's really like that type of thing.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that automation gives you that flexibility to build your organizational structure around that. I think Craig alluded to it when he talked. Like for us, we're envisioning that being in our operations center, which is a 24/7 center. And that helps because today engineers do it. But as your engineer, you're focused on designing and architecting, and then you get a call. Hey, I'm, the turning up the router right now in the field. Can you support remotely, right? And it distracts them from that kind of work. So organizationally, having this in place helps us build that structure around what do we want those engineers doing, and what makes sense for, hey, there might be some little things that need to be done that you have to have someone supporting a guy in the field. And I think that's where we're headed ultimately as a goal. question. You got a follow up?
I got one other question.
Uh.
So once you configuration on that device, are you backing those configurations up somewhere? So if the device fails, you restore the configuration downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it does back it up, and then the unit itself backs up. And not only does the unit itself back up, but then kind of the analytical stuff is also backed up. But it brings up an interesting point. So it's like, if a device fails, this was an additional enhancement, right? So like a device fails and you got to RMA it. You can RMA it, and you can actually, there's like a whole workflow where you can just go ahead and say, hey, this device is out for replacement. A new one goes in and it's like, okay, hey, I know I'm taking it over. So it automatically pulls down both the code and the configuration. So it's a big enhancement. I mean, back in the day, right, you're like, okay, where's my config? Is it in what tool? And then you're getting it, and then you're, again, having to unbox it or figure out how to get somebody to console into it and configure it was a hassle. So this was a big step forward in that. And again, that was early on. Like you saw, that was the second part app we kind of standardized. So when that isn't even at the part, like the whole organization one, right? So there's benefits, like I say, along the way if you just kind of chisel away at what you're trying to do. I guess my question is, these are all great initiatives. There's probably the break handle for this discussion. How do you get the how do you free up the resources to even start this? Like if you got Craig, AUS, and it's like, this is 10 years earlier, right? It's like, already small below we had the stuff, right? We got this business unit wanted this and that. I got 10 substations come on the last 3 years, whatever, right? I'm already got own thing. How you free up Craig's time to do some of those initial steps like compliance, scalarization, how you're now, how to do compete with your peers to free up sometimes Craig. And then essentially once the initiative starts and now you got like worldwide and potential on board, they're obviously always going to be doing a back and forth with SMEs like Craig. Like they'll be doing stuff on site or the back room, and eventually they'll reach these stopping forks, but they need more info from Craig that others like there. How do you keep it cool? Just a side job, like do it when you have free time, Craig. This is a thing you need to do to improve the company as a whole. Yeah. Well, I mean, I could start out on that. I think our management did a really good job because what they did is they prioritized it. In fact, this happened with our director who had just retired, and he said, you know what, we need to make this a priority. And he actually stood up a team with Matt's team, right? Stood up a full automation team, but that's their focus. They developed dashboards and intake processes for, hey, who's got idea for automation and what you want to do? So that started out by really enabling that capability and kind of cycles to make things happen. The second part was, some of it we honestly had to do smart sourcing. So we've been working with WWT, and they've got a lot of talent, they've got lab stuff, and so we spent a lot of time in that. So some of the things, it's like, hey, I got this idea, here's a framework of what we're looking to do, go ahead and try to make some of this work. And so they'll do that in their lab and then bring it out and start using it. And so by doing that, we haven't really taken somebody away from what they're doing, but we've added the cycles. However, right, you still have to get that team on board. And so at some point, what you do is you start bringing them in and start seeing that, okay, hey, this thing is there, and this is the model now we're going to use, that you educate them on it, they know how to do it, and now it's starting to free up their time, right? But you know, where there's not, you just have to prioritize. You have to make it important. To your point, if you don't have support on that, and it's just like, well, hey, we're too busy to turn off the sink because we're busy mopping the water, you know, you gotta kind of look at them. But it's so one thing, so our operations, principal managers here, but one thing that happened or like that tier 3 support that actually we're doing this work kind of, you know, overtly or like as a kind of a second job. So what our operations manager did was actually, you're not going to get on call anymore, right? We'll ship that work to our network operations center, right? Tool your tier 1 and tier 2 to enable more, so that you could free up somebody else's time so that they can focus on like this next level, strategic level initiatives. But I just want to know like customize this time is here, so you did that part project set. What's up, Visa?
No, you can see it more than you.
Well, holy man, more combo part.
I think to
I was just gonna say, just a shout out for what did happen there. Pointed out, Travis actually did take one of our engineers and Jim. He took Jim and he said, "Look, Jim, I'm tired of all this that's going on with these configurations." Before we had all this, he actually took Nanomoy. He said, "I want you to get the standard, and I want you to be able to check it. I want you to be able to push it, and I want you to be able to have confidence that it's not going to impact the system." And you took him off all the other work. They said, "You work on that for 2 weeks and show me what you got." And I'll tell you what, he delivered some pretty good stuff. He said, "Okay, this is great. Now enhance it and build on it." And you know what? That became something that got used by that entire team. And again, if you look at the high repeatability of what happened, that initial investment in time, but at the manager level saying, "Hey, I want you to put your time. I don't care. All your other things we're not going to do. We're going to give to somebody else." And it worked. And so with that, we started to see some real savings in time. But you almost kind of have to really focus on it, make something happen.
Sad, it was all part of our strategy, right? We established our transformation office, right? We identify, right, some key pillars, and Craig, maybe you can more times help you, right? One was a digital first mindset, right? Well, we were changing our culture of our individuals, Open Telecom down into our application space. We had automation initiative, the priorities where we really assess the return on investment. So you could help prioritize where we focus. We do some training, but network operations, data center operations, we all contribute resources, right? We saw the value in the dedicated automation team, so we put in people with unique expertise to be part of a team to solve the problems.
Right.
And everything that they focused on had a significant return on investment. This is where we said, okay, we're going to commit, 2 months in your time, the output, but an estimate of 10 FTEs we're saving. And then after 12 months, we reassessed that and we actually realized the estimated ROI. So that's also, right, feed the feed that itch and say, okay, what's the next step? That's the next thing, right? This was built on, these were little automation activity that now we started to show, well, the more we can piece together, the greater value we get in consistency. And that, it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is, it definitely requires a little.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and probably the most fundamental question before you even say, how am I going to do this automation? Because that was part of my presentation. You really need that organizational alignment. We're not getting kicked out yet, so I'd love to get Zach and Karan to answer it as well. But I just want to summarize from the SCE's perspective. It kind of came out of operation, and as you're kind of hearing here, that's where it organically formed. Mostly out of necessity, because we were just feeling like we were underwater without automation. We were going to be able to keep swimming. But I think that there's potentially other places that could come from, engineering or otherwise, right? And I think identifying in your organization, who are people that are interested in doing this, who could kind of from a technical side spearhead this, and then having leaders bought into that and supporting them is really critical. But Karan, Zach, do you guys want to share maybe some of your perspective where you've seen this start from?
Yeah, the executive leadership alignment is critical, right? With that, and by that I don't mean, yeah, great, automation sounds awesome, go do it on top of your day job. I mean truly setting aside time for the individual to work on that. Now, to get to that point, the way I've seen it be successful is start with the use cases, right? And go meet with different teams, meet with engineering, meet with operations, meet with whoever. Start building out a set of use cases. And as you look at those use cases, what we're after are the ones that are going to have a very high ROI to the organization, but they're actually not super difficult to implement. And then you're putting wins on the board early and often and showing that ROI, building trust with the different stakeholders. And then you have momentum, right? You can build on that in other areas that will maybe take a little bit more time.
Yeah, this is one thing I'll add is it all ties back up to the executive initiatives that are happening at the CXO level, right? They're talking about, and they understand the scale at which the utility network is going to grow in support of the grid services that are going to be provided to the end consumers. So when you have that level of visibility all the way at the top, and then you have leaders, operational leaders, engineering leaders, etc., you are now talking about, well, how are we going to get all these humans to operate at 10x? There's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so many humans that we can bring on board and teach about the utility network to support it. So when that becomes very clear at the top, when someone is signing off to say, not only we have to be compliant to regulatory compliance requirement, but we also have to provide these sort of capabilities to all of our ever-growing consumers from an electricity standpoint and power grid. How are we going to do that? So once you have that understanding, now you have grassroots between different like operations team as well as engineering and automation. When you have a mashup of two where you have people raising their hand up and say, hey, I could actually write a script to do this, that is a start. So what Zach actually presented as part of his slides is it's a journey. So when there's a realization at the top to say we must do something different, and you have folks that are actually doing the work, the practitioner to say, I have a better way of doing it, that's when you start getting that like moving past that inertia that can we come together in order to solve the problem in a better way than just continue doing what we're doing. Because there's everyone at the top knows that that's not going to scale, right? And that's why when you see this sort of movement and minutia around, hey, can we start doing some level of automation? Can we actually change the processes on how we operate our network? Because it's not just take an existing mop and automate it. Because once you start automating, the way that you operate also changes, which means processes change as well for machine to be more dominant versus human. So I think it's a combination of, can you tie what you're doing as a practitioner to a CX level objective? And then you start actually getting more investments from them to say, yep, what you're trying to do is actually going to solve my large initiative problem. So I'm going to fund it, or I'm going to give you more team members or hours in a day to go do that.
All right. We went 5 minutes over. Thank you guys for giving us an extra 5 minutes. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.